But today we're going to talk about, yes.
When will the goat colony happen?
No idea. Today we're going to talk about suppressing ants. Alright, so, are they good or are they bad? Well, they're both. I'm a kind of live and let live person, so if they're not causing you trouble, why fight them? Why beat them back? This is their earth too. They do plenty of good things for us. There's some really interactions between termites that Leighton was just talking about, but in the landscape, in the garden, they do things like consume weed seeds. They help clean up the ecosystem by taking care of dead insects, dead plant parts, dead animal parts. When they take those things down into their colonies, they fertilize the soil. They move about as much earth as earthworms do, aerating and letting water get in. So, I mean, they do a lot of good things for us. But at the same time, they also protect some of our pests and cause a little problem for us in the garden. So that's what we are here to talk about today. Interestingly, if anybody's grown peonies, ants are very important for peonies, so that's another good thing. So let's see, so it's a fact, it's a myth that peonies require ants to be able to bloom. What's actually happening is the peonies have extra floral nectaries on them, where the ants are getting nectar, sugars, lipids, all sorts of good stuff. And they are actually fighting off other flower-feeding insects, so thrips, things that are going to get in there and scar your buds before they even open. So the ants are very beneficial in that regard. So another good thing that they do for us. But what we're talking about is ants in integrated pest management programs, ants in the garden, ants interfering with what we're trying to do. So oftentimes they do. They just kind of get in there and perpetuate problems from your honeydew-producing insects, also known as sapsuckers. There are aphids and whiteflies and psyllids and mealybugs and scale insects, some leaf hoppers. But what they do is they're drinking out your plant juices and pooing out that sticky, tacky honeydew, which also grows the sooty mold, like you cannot see in that top picture. So that's a secondary infection. If you ever see that black kind of sooty mold growth on your plants, that's a situation that we need to take care of, which is pretty easy to. You can wash it off with soap and water. But we need you to take a step back and think, okay, who is the honeydew producer? Who is the sapsucker that's creating this? Ants are usually going to be in that mix, protecting them, because that honeydew is apparently a wonderful food source and the ants love it. So they will protect those pests. They will fight off our beneficials. There are even some stories with aphids and ants where the ants will take the aphid down into their colony and feed it, bring it water all winter long, and then in the spring they'll take it back up and put it back on the plants to start the whole process over again. That's what we're talking about. We're talking about breaking that relationship so that the ants don't just proliferate, or so they don't get moved from aphid-infested plants over to clean plants. They will just move your pests right on. So, mechanical disruption, if you can get anything in there and break up the mouth, they're going to focus their energy on fixing their home. Another thing is pruning back, especially around houses, and we're going to talk about this when we get to placement around structures. But pruning back plants that are creating bridges onto the house or onto other plants, that's important. And then proper baiting techniques. So what is proper baiting? To properly bait for your ants, you need to think like an ant. Ant colonies are massive. They contain hundreds of thousands of ants, and everybody has a very specific function. So the workers are either tending to the young, feeding and taking care of the queen, building and expanding the colony, digging new tunnels, things like that, or they're assigned to go out and look for food. And this is the problem with these little scatterbaits, or I've heard some people get out there with bleach water and spray their ants down what they see. The trouble with doing that is you're only attacking a very, very small percentage of the colony. So I've read that it is anywhere between 4 and 15% that are assigned as foragers to go out and look for food. So if you're just out there with a scatterbait, or heavens forbid, a bottle of bleach, and you're killing the ones that you see, when they don't return home with dinner, she's going to reassign more foragers to go back out and look for food. So it's going to be this never-ending cycle. So proper baiting then means that we are using a boric acid-based syrup, boric acid and sugar water, to trick them into taking the toxicant, the boric acid, back home to the queen. So ants have a series of stomachs. So they will feed on the bait, they will carry it in one of their stomachs, take it back to the nest and give it back to everybody else, and make another trip out and go get more food. The ant bait syrups that you either hopefully are purchasing or that you're mixing yourself are between 0.5% and 1% with the boric acid in there. They can make 8 to 10 trips back and forth to your bait before the carriers just succumb to it because they've been carrying it and ingesting a little bit at a time. But the way that ants look for food is a very circuitous route, just up and down and around until they find something, and then it's Hansel and Gretel all the way back to the colony. So everybody else can go right to the food source and look for the food. So another very important thing when we're baiting is to make sure we don't mix this a little bit on the heavy side because we really want to get after the ants. If they can taste that there is over 1% boric acid by concentration in here, first of all, they will drop alarm pheromones all the way around your bait station and all the way back home saying, avoid this, there's something wrong with it. If you've really mixed it heavy, really disregarded the recipe, and they can't even stomach it to take it home and they die outside the bait station, that is a huge red flag that something is wrong here. They will not visit it. Also, if you are baiting for your ants, refrain from using pesticides, insecticides that go after the ants that will kill them. Again, if they see dead ants, huge red flag. Nobody's going to visit this. So when you are baiting, another important point, these are bait stations. These are not ant traps. These are not traps. These are not traps. What that means is if you see dead ants in and around them, we need to start troubleshooting and figure out what we did wrong and go back to the beginning. So sometimes we had a run of these little plastic traps here and they were kind of slick on the inside because the idea is that the ants are going to come up through the little holes here as you stake it into the ground and they're going to access the bait in here. It was a little slick inside here, so we were finding or we were getting calls that ants were dead inside here. Until we had folks take a little sandpaper and rough it up on the inside just so the ants have a place to grip and get back out. So that seemed to help. Just little things like that. If you notice something is going wrong, you got to kind of step back and troubleshoot a little bit. But when we're baiting, we don't want to place these in full sun. Ants don't like to eat in full sun. If you can place them near water sources, that's great because ants are always looking for water. The nice thing about these big bait stations is that they have a shaded patio for the ants to feed under. So we'll talk about these more in a minute. Here is a recipe for your own DIY boric acid syrup. It is 1 cup sugar, 2 cups water, 2 teaspoons boric acid. I don't have any boric acid. 2 teaspoons boric acid. Again, don't mix it heavier or they will know. There's also, in a later slide, I've got some pages on the slides here against the table, there is a recipe for borax. So it's slightly different. There it is right there. So a 5% borax bait is 10 pounds sugar, 2 pounds borax, and water to make 5 gallons. So if you can't find the boric acid, which actually I've been told you can get it at like the Rite Aid or the 99-cent store, but borax you can get in the laundry aisle of most stores, so you can mix up your own borax bait. So, different bait stations that are on the market. This is the Ant Pro bait station. It holds about 20 ounces. It's got a reservoir. This is UV protected plastic, so it's not going to evaporate and get more concentrated as it sits outside, so that's a consideration. So you fill up the reservoir. There are 2 little channels and kind of a little duct here. So you fill it up and you screw it down tight. Now it's not going to spill. You can toss these all in the back of the truck or in your wheelbarrow while you fill them up and then wheel them out to your garden. Then when you get out there, there's also a stake in case you're not on level ground. So you stake it into the ground so it is level. Otherwise, all the bait's just going to kind of dribble out. We've experienced that with a customer. So once you get to where you're going, there are some arrows on the bait station, and you're going to just open it up from one arrow to the other. And that is going to allow gravity-fed bait to come into this little channel here, and the ants can go all the way around and pick it up and take it back home. These are about $32. We do rent them for about $9.75 for a 6-month period in case you want to get a bunch out there to really not pack your ants, or in case you don't want a huge investment in a bunch of plastic pieces. So that's a really nice strategy for a rental. Also, you can make your bait stations with just little, all right, they say don't use food containers, but it's easy to visualize when I say a cottage cheese container or a sour cream container. So a little container, if you want to put the lid on it so the kids and the dogs don't bother it, that's great. What you're going to do is you're going to drill 1/8-inch holes around the top so they can get in and get out. These won't be able to get in. This is very non-toxic, the boric acid solution, so you'd have to drink somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 gallons before you get a tummy ache. So very non-toxic, but still, if you don't want anybody messing with it, you can slap a lid on. If you are making your own bait station out of just a container, you want to make sure you have twigs or some kind of bridge material so they can get down there and get back out with the bait. Again, we don't want dead ants in or around our bait station. Very important point, if you are certified organic, recently CCOF has kicked this off of their list because the active ingredient in here is disodium octoborate tetrahydrate. You never remember that one. So this DOT, which is very, very similar to boric acid, they are now considering it a synthetic. So if you're a certified organic, this is no-go for you. What you want to be doing is mixing your own with boric acid. The gentleman that developed this system has also developed a powdered bait, so we're not just shipping water all over the country. What this is sugar and not table sugar, so it's sucrose, I think, and then also the amino acids that would mix it up to be essentially this same mix. As long as you're using this with boric acid or using that DIY recipe that we talked about, you are totally within organic compliance. Just a PSA. All right, so when we are placing our ant bait stations around the house or around structures, basically you're putting one on each wall or one on each side of the structure, paying attention to which are kind of important walls and things like that. Wherever you can get it near faucets, air conditioning units, things like that. Remember, they're always looking for water. Keep it in the shade. Wherever you've got 2 walls where insects are coming from different directions, so on a corner, they really like that. So those are really good tips for where to place these things. Any places where you see ant trails, that should be a dead giveaway. Don't put it directly on the ant trails where you see them running. You want to just kind of nudge it up next to them so somebody stumbles across and is like, hey, guys, what I found. When you are out in the garden, around trees, around shrubs, of course they're going up into the trees, getting all this good stuff up there. So you really want to paint around your bark with some kind of sticky barrier, sticky material. Please put some kind of barrier in between your tree bark and your sticky material. We got to visit a hobby orchard where she was going after her ants and she had painted tanglefoot all over the trees, just directly on the bark. Those things were crying out for help. The bark was peeling off those poor trees. So this stuff is not toxic, but think about painting glue all over your body. Nobody would like that. So saran wrap, cling wrap, burlap even, something like that around the tree trunk first before you paint this on. Now keep in mind, if you've got really groovy bark, deeply fissured bark, the ants are just going to sneak up right behind that. So put some kind of cotton batting around it first before you wrap it, and then put your sticky barrier on. These are only effective as long as they stay sticky, so they will get stuck up with debris and dust and dirt and dead ant bodies because they will sacrifice themselves to create a bridge. So you are going to have to go back out periodically and re-goop it. There is a recipe for, sort of equal parts water and corn syrup boiled together. Makes a real nice sticky pest barrier DIY. So then on large scale, so this is the tiny little station that we showed earlier. So these are $32, these are $4. These hold 4 ounces, these hold 20 ounces. This would not be appropriate for an avocado orchard, something like that. So there's where these come in. Ken, the gentleman here in this corner, flip it upside down and undo the whole thing to fill it. So there's a little started controlling your ants in a small radius, then you kind of move them out further and you start kind of widening the circle of control that you're suppressing the ants on. Really fun guy. So it's not often I get to talk about new things in biocontrol in the insect world, but here is something kind of coming down the pipes. All right, from complaints from orchard people, right? So they complain that these are a lot of work, to maintain, a lot of work to go out and fill all the time. So what Dr. Hoddle started doing from UC Riverside is developed these infrared sensors that they clipped right to irrigation lines. So they were coming up with about 85% accuracy in being able to determine, just by the number of ants running along those little superhighways, those irrigation lines between the trees, how many were climbing up into the trees. So they're using this information to start to develop thresholds, and at what point do we need to start considering ants an issue versus just part of the ecosystem. But in addition to that, and in addition to the chlorpyrifos ban, which was something they really loved, Dr. Hoddle has developed these biodegradable gel beads, kind of like, I think of Orbeez, those little kids' toys. I love those things. So these are either impregnated with a very, very small percentage of a toxicant or the organically approved spinosad, and so they're just little gel balls, and you sprinkle them around the orchard floor, the ants suck it out of them, they degrade, and you suppress your ants. They're not on the market yet. I don't know what they'll be called. I don't know when they're coming, but that's pretty exciting. It's something to look out for. Then another PSA, stop ACP. So Asian citrus psyllid, here are some fantastic pictures of their waxy tubules. They are a psyllid. They are a honeydew producing pest, except their honeydew is these spiral tubules of waxy stuff. That's how big they are between somebody's fingers. They turn your citrus this funny green yellow color. That's the HLD, the humblum big, the citrus greening disease. But there is some really, really, really exciting evidence coming out that the abundance of natural enemies and habitat to draw in the natural enemies, hoverflies most specifically, are really suppressing and killing and knocking back the Asian citrus psyllid. So, yay, natural enemies. So, here's your PSA. Keep suppressing your ants so your ants aren't keeping these pests going, because the ants are absolutely working the psyllids for that honeydew. They're absolutely fighting off, there, this bottom corner picture is an ant fighting off the Tamarixia wasp, the one that's going after the psyllids. Keep suppressing your ants, keep fostering your beneficials, and we can knock things like this out. Here's my contact information. I've got cards, I've got the slides over there. Happy to answer any questions, now or later. Products over in the other building if you want to take a closer look at the ant control products as well.
Where do you purchase?
So I don't know that we have anything for purchase here, just because it's kind of a pain to do cash, but we are right down the road, right at the end of the avenue. Are you local? All right. So before you leave, I can give you my card and direct you down to the storefront, or the insectary rather, and we can get you stuff before you head downtown. Yes. Where we grow the insects. All right. Thank you. Yes, thank you. Thanks for staying.
So if you have any questions about managing any kinds of pests or disease, we're happy to talk with you at length. So let's see, where are you going? You over to...
I'm headed back over to the booth right now, so I'm going to take all these ant products and go right across to San Miguel, I think.
So
Right across the way.
you go into Anacapa, and immediately to your right is a joint booth for Rincon-Vitova Insectaries, Sierra Club Ag Committee, and the permaculture designers in the neighborhood.